closed session.
Move. Second.
Okay, motion made by Director Stewart, second by Director Webb. All in favor coming out of closed session?
Aye.
Aye. We are out of closed session at 6:27. Public report on action taken in closed session.
Each of the items was discussed. There was no reportable action.
Okay. And with that, do I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion adjourned.
Second. Motion made by Director Webb, seconded by Director Stewart. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned at 6:28. Let's call the meeting to order. Roll call.
President Rick Wood,
Here.
Director Gregory Washington,
Present.
Director Rick Webb,
Present.
Director Barry Lennon,
Here.
Director Ben Stewart.
Here. Please rise for pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion is made by Director Glennon, seconded by Director Webb. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
The deletion.
Oh, I'm sorry. There has been a deletion on the agenda. That would be under presentations, B. So can I have a motion to amend your motions? To accept the agenda with elimination of item B on presentations. Okay, motion has been amended. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Board Secretary?
This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the board on any item not on the agenda regarding district business. State law prohibits the district from taking any action on any items not on the agenda unless authorized under section 54954.2 sub B of the government code, and your matter may be referred to the general manager. An individual may also address the board on any agenda item at the time the matter is discussed and prior to board consideration or action. Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. Your time will start when you approach the podium, and you will be given a 30-second warning before your time expires. If you choose to ask a question during this time, any response by the board will not extend your time. Questions may be referred to the general manager to be answered at a later time after the meeting. In order to allow for a smooth and orderly meeting, and allow each speaker the ability to address the board, disruptions from the audience will not be tolerated and you can be asked to leave. We appreciate your cooperation in this democratic process.
Okay, at this time, we'll open the floor to non-agenda public comments. Anybody wish to make any public comments? Okay, with that, then we will close public comments and move on to minutes. M1, 2, and 3. Have a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes for M1, 2, and 3. Second.
Okay, motion made by Director Webb, second by Director Glennon. Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Consent calendar, I have a motion to approve the consent calendar CC1.
So moved.
Second. Motion is made by Director Glennon, seconded by Director Stewart. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Presentations, PR1, wastewater treatment plant rehab project, and project update by Kennedy Jenks.
Okay, can we recess for a second?
Sure. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute recess while they set the presentation up. Okay. All right, let's call the meeting back to order. We're going to go ahead and postpone the update by Kennedy Jenks while we work on some technical difficulties. New business 1, election of vice president. Presenter John Houghton, assistant GM.
Yes, the board, since Mr. Wolford has passed, we have a vacancy for the vice president seat, and we'd like to know if you guys would like to pick the vice president.
I nominate Rick Webb.
Even though I'm not supposed to, I'll second it if nobody else does. Good, we have a motion by Director Glennon, seconded by Director Wood. Any other nominations? All in favor of Rick Webb for vice president?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I can't vote for myself, right?
Yes, you can.
Oh, I can't, I don't refuse me, no?
No.
Okay, I'll vote for me too.
Okay, then the motion is 5-0. All right, at this time, we will go ahead and go back to presentations, PR1, project update by Kennedy Jenks.
All right, so I can have you advance the slides when we're ready. Does that work? Well, thank you for the opportunity to come back and present. Most of the presentation is addressing the blower alternatives that we've been talking about at the past several meetings. But we also have several slides. One slide addresses the liquefaction question, and then I have another slide that updates your capital budget based upon the additions to the project, if you like the way the blowers look, and with the expansion of the percolation ponds, which we've been talking about. And then I summarized in the last couple of slides about the value of the water rights, depending upon how much groundwater you know, how much percolation disposal you do, all or portion. So I have a couple slides on that. So then, if you go to the next slide, this slide is just an outline or an agenda of the discussion for the blower alternatives. I want to go over the design criteria, what's currently in the plans as they were at 60% at the end of January, and then we have several alternatives. I actually have 3 alternatives. One has a sub-alternative, so there's actually 4 alternatives I want to present tonight, and present the costs for each of those alternatives, and then we have a recommendation in the presentation. Next. So, just as a highlight or a reminder, I just want to reiterate, because it sets the stage for the next slide, and that is that the actual strength of the wastewater going into the plant is a combination of what's coming through the sewer pipelines to the plant and into the headworks, but it's also, in addition, it's the septage that's delivered by the multiple trucks that deliver to the site just about every day. And there's an average of about 30,000 gallons, but it's about 10 times stronger wastewater that on our, typically comes in septage hauling trucks. So in this slide, what we do is we have the quality, historic quality of your raw wastewater, but we have the higher strength, if you will, of the septage, and we combine the two to come up with a design concentration. So I just wanted to remind you, I mentioned that to you a couple meetings ago. So if we go to the next slide, one of the reasons I want to emphasize this is that the plant's designed to be very robust and handle additional BOD load, and that's one of the ways to rate a wastewater plant besides just its hydraulic capacity. So we talked about the hydraulic capacity of the plant using a 95% confidence limit of the variability in the demands that we've seen in the recent history. And so the average demand right now is 1.15 MGD. But you're going to grow over the next 2 decades. And your urban water management plan shows through 2040 that you're going to go from 18,000 people to roughly 20,000 people. So we're doing your water master plan, your sewer master plan, so we're tracking these growth increases over time. And so the top line here is the population currently, or as of 2017, with just over 18,000 people. And if you go to the right and you go out 23 more years or 21 years from now, basically closing in on 20,000 people. And this is what's in the SCAG forecast for this area, and this is what's in your urban water management plan. Now there's also some water conservation that's going to reduce, on average, household usage, which reduces the flow to the sewer. New homes have more efficient appliances, and as people in older homes replace their appliances, as most of you know, you're getting low-flow dishwashers and low-flow washing machines. So there's actually been a progressive decrease in the amount of sewer flow per resident, per home. And so we've actually got a pretty flat demand, even though there's a 10% increase in the population. So we do creep up in sewer flows from 1.15 to 1.25 in the next 20 plus years. But what we want to point out in the bottom, if you drop to the bottom row, is the BOD loading. So the BOD loading associated with 2020 startup of the new plant facilities, there's roughly 20,000 people in BOD capacity, and we have this 3,000 person equivalent, which is delivered in those septic trucks. So for some reason, pick a number, 8 or 10 years out, you have a growth boom, and you add a couple thousand people in Rosamond, and they're connected to the sewer. You've got this reserve capacity in the amount of septage that's currently delivered, and you could reduce, in part, the allowable septage that you accept at the plant. Basically, though, at the end of 2040, if you continue to grow, you really would add yet another module to the wastewater plant. You've got a couple hundred acres, and so there should be, you have excess capacity in the raw water pump station, excess pump capacity. So basically, we can add another module in 20 plus years, assuming you follow this growth pattern. But it raises a question that we're at capacity initially, and we really do have the potential to cover the next 20 years as currently forecasted. I just wanted to reiterate that. All right. I got through that without questions, so I want to go to the next slide before there are questions. So next, I want to go back to the blowers. So, it's not moving. There we go. Thank you very much. So, just to remind people that the wastewater plant that we're currently proposing to expand has the activated sludge process is called the BioLax process. It's a proprietary process from Parkson, but it's a very reliable and robust process. And we talk about it having 30 days of residence time. And so basically it's very resistant to any minor changes in flow or upsets. This is a picture on the top and in the middle of the actual diffuser strings and the actual open basin called the BioLax basin. And this is what we'll be adding next to this one, a much larger basin. So in the bottom you see a picture of the blowers. But what we're doing is we're downgrading the existing plant from a half an MGD to 0.32. So we're substantially downgrading the plant that you have because the strength of the wastewater has increased over the last 10 to 15 years as conservation has crept in. The strength of wastewater has gone up, and also we're putting the septage into the head of the plant. We're really accounting for the septage. So basically, instead of a half an MGD plant, we're saying that that module is now 0.32. It's going to take 25% of the flow capacity of the flow. 75% of the flow will normally go to the new basins that we're in design on and proposing to have constructed. So the bottom right-hand corner of this table, you see a number, and it's 4,300. Now 4,300 is the SCFM, which is the standard cubic feet per minute of air that the blowers have a capacity to deliver. And that you need a lot of air, continuous air, to keep and grow the biology to run the wastewater plant. So the air is very important. This is why we're talking about the blowers and having full redundancy of the blowers. And Greg emphasized this several meetings ago, and this is what we'll bring back when we're talking about how do we get 4,300 SCFM of air in a reliable fashion. So if we go to the next slide, I want to show the sort of the baseline of where we are now and what it is that we would be changing from. So the 60% design tried to utilize the two existing blowers, which are 100 horsepower blowers. So there's space for a third blower, but we don't want a third 100 horsepower blower. We want to have a larger blower. So we're proposing to put in a 200 horsepower blower, which gives us one large and one small blower. That's 300 horsepower. That's the amount of capacity you need to get the 4,300 SCFM. The problem with that is you don't have a redundant unit. You only have a redundant unit of the 100 horsepower. If it were to fail, you'd have a second redundant unit, and you rotate those units. But we don't have a unit to rotate for the 200 horsepower. So what we said is potentially we could have a spare motor and bearings on site, maybe change them out quickly within days or a week. And Greg's been in maintenance a long time, and he knows that is not always as easy as it sounds. And so having redundant units simply means we're going to have to take out the old compressor, spend a little bit more money, and have full redundancy. And that's what's in the next alternatives at your request, and that's what we're bringing back. So the next slide shows the first of 3 alternative configurations of 4 total alternatives. Well, actually, before I go to the next slide, this is just a plan view and a section view of how we would put in or squeeze in, if you will, that one 200 horsepower blower. So this shows the 201 horsepower blowers in that room. The space that's empty we would fill with this 200 horsepower blower. But still, there's a shortfall in that if the 200 horsepower blower is out of service, until it's back online, we have less than optimum amount of air. And so we wouldn't be treating to the extent, we would be keeping the plant flowing and the bugs alive, but we wouldn't be removing and denitrifying to the extent that we're expected to do. So this is still the existing project. If we go to the next slide, it shows what it would be like to add 2 300 horsepower blowers. This would allow you, with the same type of blower, a centrifugal multi-stage blower, you would have 2 units, 300 horsepower each, and the 300 horsepower unit can serve the entire plant, 4,300 SCFM. So you have full 100% redundancy with the second unit. And typically we would rotate these units about once a month, and they would get even wear, and they would always be ready as a backup. And if there was a maintenance issue, you'd be able to resolve it even within that cycle, month to month, but certainly you would make an immediate repair, and you would have always a backup blower. It's really tight. There's actually inadequate space to maintain these blowers, squeezing them into the building. The building's a little small for these 2 blowers, so we kept looking at other configurations, and we have what we think is a better layout. But this is just one of the alternatives. It's shown in the left in plan and shown in the right in the section. So I also want to mention that when the power goes out, you need to keep your wastewater plant running. You don't shut off the wastewater plant. It keeps flowing. So you have an emergency generator on site. And it's a pretty hefty, big emergency generator. It's 600 kW. It has an automatic transfer switch, so when the power drops or you lose power, it automatically can operate. It operates a large portion of the plant, but not all the plant. And it definitely operates, the raw water, the headworks and the raw water pumps. It actually goes from one MCC called MCC1 to another MCC called MCC3 to serve this smaller, older blower building. There's not enough capacity to start these blowers. And so what we need to do would be even if we reconfigure the MCC that's limiting the link between the emergency generator and these blowers, it takes a lot of power to start a 300 horsepower motor. There's an inrush current that requires a lot out of the generator. So what you see on the right-hand side down, the 3rd bullet down, is that we're proposing to add a second emergency generator, a 400 kW generator. These generators come as a package unit on a skid in a noise enclosed box, delivered off a tractor trailer truck, set down on a slab that will be poured in the appropriate location, and we could connect that new emergency generator to the blower building and run the blower building off this separate generator. That would allow us from having to reconfigure all the other MCCs and emergency power systems of the plant. So we're proposing that in the cost estimates for these blowers and their electrical panels and this new emergency backup generator. Now, if we go to the next alternative, this is what we talked about a month ago as well, and that would be, we could also get 300 horsepower online by using 2 150s plus a third 150. Next slide, please. There we go. So on the left, again in plan, now you see 3 lined up, and they're 150 horsepower each. So 2 of them together would be 300 horsepower. You'd have just a spare unit. But what happens here is there's more use per unit. I mean, this is 33% more use per blower than the previous one because you had 100% redundancy. So this was less favorable in Greg's mind, and he mentioned this at the last board meeting, that the runtime would be higher, the wear and tear would be higher, it would preferable to have full redundancy rather than a 2+1. The 2+1 fits a little bit better. We still have a bit of an issue running in emergency power, but it doesn't take as large a generator. It's not 600, it's not 400 kW, a second new generator. It's only 250 kW. It's smaller and less expensive, but still there's a power supply issue for starting such large motors on your existing system, limited by MCC3 and the way that the plant site electrical is laid out. All right, so what's the next alternative? We came up with a new, better mousetrap, a new, better blower. If we go to alternative 3, and this is labeled 3A, what we're looking at is a different type of blower. So this type of blower is called a centrifugal variable speed drive. It actually has magnetic bearings instead of mechanical bearings. They're high-end bearings that have a lot less friction, and the generator is more efficient. You can actually run the same 4300 SCFM now with 225 horsepower instead of 300 horsepower. This makes it easier to start with your emergency generator. It makes it more efficient and less power consumptive. These two units in your inflow pumps are the highest power usage on the proposed site expansion. You're no longer using UV, which used to be high in power consumption. So this is fine. We could start this generator if we reworked that MCC, replaced MCC3 with a new MCC and cabled and rewired the site. But it's tedious and it's challenging, and so if we go to the next slide, which we labeled, this is the last alternative, alternative 3B, it's the same units, it's the same layout, plan and section is shown here in red. But if you go down the third bullet, now the additional generator that's required to run this blower building is only 250 kW instead of 400 kW, which lowers the cost of this equipment and the electrical cabling and such. So the costs are shown on the very next slide, which is where I'm taking you next. So here on the top line of these 5 rows, underneath the header, is the existing baseline project. And the baseline project, because we're just putting in one 200 horsepower blower, is about $370,000. So we want to compare alternatives 1, 2, 3A, 3B to the baseline and say, well, what's the additional cost? And alternative 1, because the 300 horsepower multi-stage blowers are expensive, they're big, they require big electric panels, and they require a big emergency generator, we'd be adding $1 million to the capital cost estimate to get alternative 1 constructed. Alternative 2, the blowers are less expensive, about half as much each, and there's 3 of them, but still 3 is a good $100,000, more than $100,000 less than the other 2. Their panels are less, and this is where there's a slight error in the slide, and I crossed it out on your handout. If you're following in your book, you see we took a blue pen, and I crossed out just running one of these to actually recommending we put in an additional 250 kW generator as well. So having a 250 kW generator for alternative 2 would allow you to run the two 150s, because you'd start one and then you start the next, and that's part of what's the load required for sizing emergency generators. This still isn't our recommended alternative, even though it shows there as being slightly lower than alternative 3B. Here the estimate is $560,000 more than the base project. Alternative 3A, the electrical configuration and panels are fairly costly, so that's actually more than 3B. So our recommendation, as we'll show in the next couple slides, is alternative 3B, which is these, if you will, more efficient centrifugal variable speed drive blowers with magnetic bearings. And we thought you'd be interested in knowing more about these, so we took the manufacturer's brochure from Atlas Cupco and put it in the back of your package. There's actually 2 sets of brochures. And there are other manufacturers that make these, but this is one of the manufacturers we've been working with on the sizing, budget pricing, and efficiencies, energy requirement, size, motor sizes. So here in the 6th row over, the delta, which is the difference between the base and the proposal, is for alternative 3B, $600,000. So it would increase your plant capital cost by roughly $600,000 to take out the existing 2 blowers, modify the building, put in these 2 new blowers, and then power them up for emergency to a new generator in box. It'd be about, going from about me to you, it'd be about the size of the the skid, you know, inside a box. That's about the size of a 250 kW unit. And all that's included in that differential price. So we would run it off the normal power supply. The power supply to the plant is sufficient, but it's the emergency power that, you know, is causing us headaches, if you will. So the next slide is simply a summary that recommends.
I have a question, Dr. Ferguson. On this variable speed drive, from what I understand, it is built into the unit itself, and not separate?
Yes. It's part of the.
Okay. Now that's my question, is that if that VSD goes down, is it replaceable, or is it something that we're gonna have to replace the whole unit? I mean, I like VSD, but I've never seen it where it's actually built into the unit itself. It's usually a separate unit that you can work
Right.
on and replace.
Most motor panels, you know, are either a fixed speed pump motor panel or a blower motor panel. And they make variable speed drives that the electronics are in the panel to adjust
Right.
from 60 hertz to something lower so that you can turn down various pumps or blowers or motors. But you're right, in this case it's built into the system. You've been.
It's replaceable separately. So
Okay,
so
you
even those.
can go in there and just replace that VSD, and you don't have to replace the
Yes.
whole guts of the thing.
Yeah.
And, okay, now that's,
The brochure shows a diagram, Greg, that will explain it more clearly, but yeah, you don't need to replace the whole blower.
okay,
Yeah.
and that was my concern. I just wanted to make sure that it was a component that can be replaced separately if it goes out, which they do go out.
Yeah.
And, also, you mentioned that the current generator we have now cannot run the entire plant.
It can run most of the plant you have now, but as we expand the plant, we're taking the UV system out, we're taking the recycled water booster pumps out, we're just putting in small utility water pumps. So you have enough power on site. It's getting the power routed from the emergency generator MCC3 to this building.
Okay, now my question is, I like the alternative 3B, that looks good. So you get a 250 kW generator, that one will run the PAC building.
It will run the blowers. The blowers are the blower panels will be in the electrical room right to the south of the room, the mechanical room.
Right.
My understanding is the rest of the building would still run off, you know, we're cutting separate, because we need two new panels for
Right.
these 225 horsepower blowers. We're going to take the two 100s off the wall. The new 250s will fit within that same space. We're going to put two new panels on the wall. They'll be fed off the same bus for continuous power, but when there's power failure, they will not be served with the rest of the plant off the big emergency generator. They'll come off this secondary new emergency generator, and our electrical has explained to me that the emergency transfer switches communicate and it's smooth. They don't run, they're not synchronized, they're separate.
Right.
But they come on based on the same failure.
Right,
within
in other words,
seconds.
basically, when the generator fires up, it's just gonna go under whatever load it's under from one PAC blower to the next one. My question is, if we have this dedicated 250 kW generator to run the blower, be sufficient to run the entire plant?
Yes, it's 600 kW and the requirements are not that high, that don't reach the
Right.
limit of the
So
generator.
we can, because that's my concern, is that I want to make sure that if we have a power outage, that we've got capacity to run the entire facility off of emergency generator power.
Right, the UV's been decommissioned,
Right.
75 horsepower has been discoupled because there's no recycled water system. So the 1+1+1 influent pumps, the system, the RAS pumps, all the site can be run off that.
Okay, okay, good, thank you. All right,
So the next slide is really just a summary of what we were just discussing about the blowers themselves. And on the right is just some of the highlights from the manufacturer, and again, it's their language, as you know, manufacturers, you guys buy new cars, and you hear all the sales pitches, and these are the sales pitches. So basically what they're telling you is, you know, our units are, well, they have to be oil-free and they're oil-free, but they're basically quiet, they run at cool temperatures, they're very reliable, etc. And the bottom half of this is all about the magnetic bearings, because these are unique feature that's more efficient than than mechanical bearings. And Toby has a project where they're purchasing these generators right now, and the operations staff just went to the manufacturer's startup facility for the delivery of their new system, and they're really excited about it.
Yeah, especially from a maintenance perspective, Greg, it's the magnetic bearings is really, been very, or the past, I would say, year became very attractive. And it reduces maintenance a lot, it's easier to maintain. And we're putting in 4 150s at Silicon Valley Clean Water right now. Yeah.
What's the life expectancy of how often do they have to be changed out?
The magnetic bearings?
Yeah.
According to the manufacturer, pretty much, never. Yeah.
There's in the brochure they show 30,000, 40,000. They show some hours with regard to certain maintenance requirements.
No such thing as a bearing that's gonna last forever.
That's the manufacturer, Greg, yeah. So yes, you're right. So, but, I mean, it's
Okay, because this is a fairly new technology that they're kind of going with, a lot of in the maintenance industry, they have been going from a preventative maintenance to predictive maintenance structure. And will these magnetic bearings be able to be included in a predictive maintenance as far as, heat studies on the unit, vibration analysis, things of this nature?
Yeah, it actually fits exactly into the predictive maintenance scenario. So I mean, pretty much the magnetic bearings helps to, it automatically centers the shafts. So I'm not a maintenance person, but what I've heard is it just makes it much more predictable.
One thing I'd like you to find out, because changing out bearings, whether they're standard off-the-shelf bearings or your custom-made bearings, that a lot of Atlas Copcos have in them. What is the availability of personnel that can work on these magnetic bearings? Because I'm going down the line that moving parts will fail, it's just a matter of time, and making sure that we can get somebody that can work on it, not just that, oh, we don't work on those, we don't have anybody here to do it. And then, we're sitting there with a piece of equipment that we can't repair. And that's something that I would like to.
Like somebody in or somewhere else to do it for.
Yeah, all Atlas, Spencer, all the blower manufacturers we've been communicating with the past few months, pretty much as they said they've got no problem bringing somebody in from LA.
Okay, I'd like to get I really like this unit, and I've never shied away from new technology, but I just want to make sure that we run our plant on this completely. That we've got the means of being able to maintain it and repair it when necessary.
Yep.
There's a maintenance schedule suggestion on this one of these pages. It's interesting to look at the number of hours. It's like putting in synthetic oil in your car. You don't do anything at 4,000 hours or 8,000 hours except a visit. 24,000 hours, and then over at 48,000 hours, they have you replacing the pump seal and the fan. Okay, 48,000 hours.
That's
with 50% operation. That's like 10 years.
Yeah, when you're all Canadian, it'd be about 10 years run out.
So that's pretty excited about this, and they seem sophisticated when you look at the literature. I'm sure they have all the right pickups to report their own, trip their own, not fault, alarms, to have
warnings.
warning systems and reporting alarm systems. So that's the plan. So we've talked a lot about the blowers. Is there any other questions? Because I would like to.
One other thing that I do have a question on this here, and maybe you can look into it and answer. I know that one of the biggest killers of PACs is during a power outage. And when you lose power and these things are shut down, not cycled down like they're supposed to be, and then they go to start back up again when power is restored.
A couple are still moving.
Right. I kind of like to get a little history on that as to how these things react to coming off of Edison power, going on to emergency power, and you know, what's the process for cycling these things down? In other words, on a normal application, when you're using unit 1 and you want to cycle that down to go ahead and bring unit 2 online, you know, there's a long procedure of bringing this thing down slowly and everything else, and then there's also a procedure when power's interrupted, and I kind of like to get what they've done to address that scenario as well.
For what we found out at this stage is that because of the magnetic bearings, it's a much quicker change compared to a mechanical bearing that you need to ramp down and up again.
But we can specifically ask, you know, on power failure.
That'd be my only concern, because, you know, we do lose power around here, and it's gonna happen. It's hopefully not too much, but it's gonna happen to where, you know, and I just wanna make sure that they're robust enough to handle that kind of scenario.
All right, so the next slide changes topics to what I mentioned. There's some questions about liquefaction potential. So I reread the email I got in October from BSK Associates, our geotechnical, who have given us 2 reports and done the borings and test pits analysis for the site. And Oman Liu is their principal. He's been working on your site for over 20 years. He did the ponds in '99. He did the geotech for the plant. It was designed in '06, '07 and constructed in '08, '09. He's doing it now. And so I asked him, you know, what's the level of liquefaction potential even while we're mounding and raising the groundwater table? And he said, you know, overall it's low. It should be a non-issue. He explained to me that liquefaction is mostly when you have homogeneous sand, like beach sand, it's all the same. You put a structure and then you shake, you can get dramatic, you know, instantaneous settlement, especially if it's a large, you know, like call it an apartment complex, or you know, some structure sitting on that type of soil with such high water levels. What you have is a more heterogeneous mix of silt and sand and silt with some interrelated clays, which actually fortifies the structure against liquefaction. But I told him, you know, in the middle of the perk pond, we've modeled that the water can come up within 35 feet of the center of the pond and within 50 feet of the structures. And he came back and said at 50 feet there should be no settlement whatsoever. At 35 feet we could have slight settlement and some differential settlement of a few inches. And I said, okay, then, given that we're not paving the intermediate berms or access road, we're using more of an aggregate base with sort of a crushed rock slope stability, which makes these berms flexible. He said that's the appropriate design. He's also going to be reviewing the design for us at 90% to confirm that all of the soil recommendations are embedded in our detailed design and specifications. So this page basically summarizes that liquefaction potential is low, and it's not a significant issue, even though we did mention or talk about it a month ago. You know, what generally happens is when water levels reach within 50 feet of the surface, people check to see if it's an issue. And what we're doing here is checking and being told it's not a significant issue. It's a low potential. Okay, the next slide shifts gears and looks at, and I apologize for the fine print, but there's a lot of data here. The point of this slide is to add the additional cost that to your capital budget. We just talked about a $600,000 blower. We're adding that to your $10 million construction cost estimate. We're also adding 50% more percolation pond area, going from 15 acres of floor bottom to 22.5 acres. So we have added almost 100,000 cubic yards of additional soil, excavation, movement, stockpiling, and a little bit more berm area. So the cost for the additional work of the perk ponds is roughly $750,000. When we add those two together, you get $1,350,000. So your cost estimate is no longer $10 million, it's now $11.35 million. And that's the number I show up here, 3 rows up from the bottom. And on the far right, you've been carrying a capital budget of $12,050,000 since last April, May. Through the fall, when we did conceptual design, we were showing $9.6 million estimate. In October, we all agreed to add this emergency storage pond, which increased the estimate, and with the appropriate contingency of the 30% estimate, it's a $10 million project. So that $10 million project is now 11.35 until we do the next level of refinement of the estimate, which we're scheduled to do a 90% estimate in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And we can come back to you with that estimate as well, and its contingency. But on the far right, what you see is $13.6 million program, not project, not 12.05. And in order to do modified design work and to finish the design on the perk pond changes, and our environmental consultant now has come out. Just want to mention, our environmental consultant came out a week ago Tuesday. They did a bio-survey for Bowering Owl. It was negative. So there was no Bowering Owl. They have to do 3 surveys. They're going to do 2 more surveys, one in April, May, one in May, June. Those surveys cost money. They have to write a report and turn it into the state. So our secret consultant came to us and they need another $10,000. So there's actually $100,000 in additional engineering proposals, Amendment 5, that we will bring back to you at a future board meeting where you can agendize it, since this is just for information. But we're carrying a higher total project budget on the right of $13.6 million. The second from bottom line in bold on the right, you see it goes down by $500,000, and that's only if we reduce the contingency from 15% to 10% as the estimate goes from a 30-60% estimate to a 90% estimate. It's appropriate, or if you will, acceptable for us to lower the contingency. So if there's nothing else being added, nothing else being found in the cost analysis, you could go sort of up and back down again. So conservatively at this point, you consider the project budget $13.6 million, not $12 million. And that's why this slide is here, to go over the impacts of making these changes to the project. So, I was talking to John and Brock this week, and they were chatting about big picture alternatives, like I would call it Plan B, Plan A. So I wanted to show you in the next 2 slides. If you go to the next slide, I just want to highlight the dramatic benefit of being able to have percolation disposal provide you groundwater recharge credit. And the groundwater credits, or water rights, once pumped through your groundwater wells into your system, over a running 5-year average, you get 39% return flow credit for using this new water supply. So this is really excellent. Here we've got the project as we know it, the capital cost, including engineering, as we just mentioned, could be in the 13.1 to 13.6, new budget number. If we percolate disposal 1.18 to 1.28 over the next 20 years, as the population grows slightly, the flows increase slightly, we would be recharging. We assume that we get 90% recharge credit. There'll be a certain amount of evaporation and some losses. But then we have the 39% return flow credit. Then you end up with over 1,600 to almost 1,800 acre feet per year of groundwater recharge, groundwater rights that are available to you pump from your existing groundwater wells without paying $450 for replenishment water, or without buying AVAC water for $550. So this helps you pump more groundwater, stay off AVAC, and not have to pay replenishment charges. So what's the value of that? Well, at 1,600 to 1,800 acre feet per year, at $450, that's $750,000 to $800,000 a year. If you add this up progressively over a 20-year period without any influence of discount rate or inflation, particularly since the 450 number itself will be going up over time. It's just a simple math of $15.5 million. We're talking about a plant total capital of $13 million. So you build a plant for $13 million and you basically create the next 20 years, $15 million worth of water rights. We think that's pretty exciting. Now, if you were to do a partial plant, and you go to the next slide, just for the moment, let's call it Plan B. And let's say we just put the existing plant back in service. Go ahead and do the small piece of septage, because the septage is completely unacceptable. The regional board, they're not going to let you get away with what you're doing now much longer. And because we're going to fix it, they're letting you ride. But if you went and lined all the ponds to the north, which is 115 acres, they're not going to let you just dump raw septic in there. So basically, if you put it in the septic system and fed it back into the headworks, we would run the existing plant at that reduced flow of 0.32 MGD. And we could run it day in and day out forever at 0.32 MGD. It would run really nicely, a nice constant flow rate. So you could treat that amount, you could take that water, percolate disposal, get the groundwater recharge credits for that amount of water, but those credits are only 358 acre feet, not 1,800 acre feet. So it's just a dramatically lower amount of groundwater recharge credits, but then what do you do with the rest of the water? So the rest of the water would go to the newly lined evaporation ponds. They don't accept clay liners anymore at the regional board. They're really unhappy with what they've done in the past themselves, and they want a physical liner. So if we put in a 60 mil HDPE liner, in order to be able to get trucks in the bottom, we would cover that liner to protect it with a concrete slurry that's 12 inches thick. Here's 3 different cost estimates on how we would look at that. We were talking about this before, a year ago, that it's basically about $18 million to line all the ponds, which is 155 acres, south and north ponds. And that's not even enough. We think as you, over the next decade, you need another 15 acres of ponds. That's how we got to 20 to $22 million. But the $18 million, you're just lining 115 acres out of 150, which is the north. The first capital method A basically says, well, let's just go to the ratio. Spend $500,000 on the septic, spend 1/15th out of 150, if you will. You know, you're looking at $14 million. So this is $14+ million if you want to do septic and line all the ponds using those numbers, which were just rough estimates. The second number takes the unit cost that we've been using for the actual liner and the actual soil cement, and we apply the unit costs, and then there's all this riprap that you have to deal with out there. And then there's markup on this stuff, because basically every time we give you a cost estimate, we're adding mobilization, demobilization, bonds and insurance, 15% contractors overhead and profit, 15% contingency, and 3.5% per year to the midpoint of construction. So you have these markups that total almost close to 50%. So this capital method B shows about an $11 million project, which really looks like a $7 million project, but it becomes $11 million if you have the septic to a little over $11 million. And the last one, we heard that LA County Sand did a big area for $30 million, it turned out to be 280 acres. And so if you do their math, and you just multiply it out, and you run the same numbers, you're back at $14 million again. So it would take you $11 to $14 million to go line all those ponds and send a portion of the flow to the evaporation. What do you lose? Well, in the box, we have the percolation groundwater credits. So now what you get is the groundwater credits at 358. Actually, 358 should be, I think it was 400 something. Because so it turns out to be, I redid this box, and it came out to $200,000 a year or $4 million. So we take $15.5 million on the previous page and $4 million on this page, and the difference is about $11 million. So it's dramatically, you lose the benefit of Plan A above. So I just wanted to remind you that there's a tremendous value in being able to create and put this water to good use and use the water once it's percolated to extract several miles away through the groundwater wells, pristine groundwater that you currently have. So that's the last slide on that topic, and then it's just a big Q&A that says we're happy to answer questions. We covered a lot. That's why we're here.
Okay, I've got some questions. I would like to have further discussions on Plan B, but there are some things that we discussed about, and you got it on the half MGD plant, but at 325,000 gallons per acre foot, and going with, I'm coming up with about 520 acre foot versus 379 if we were percolating a half MGD a day. And then you get a return flow on that for the year. But without getting into all the semantics, I've always felt that the $22 million price for lining the ponds was extremely high. I know Brock said he went on to a membrane website and did their online calculator, and the square footage, it came out to the actual cost about $7.5 million. Plus, of course, that doesn't include any construction costs and things of this nature, removing the riprap. But what I was looking at, and this has been my concern, is that we're still waiting for the results of the percolation study to come in. But if it isn't, we got to have something to fall back on. And so that's why I threw out there that if we can take the existing plant that we have now without running it through the filters and without running it through the UV system and keeping it classified as Title 27 and not Title 22, and the denitrified numbers are great. They're the ones that I was looking at, some months they were 0, but they're about 0.75, 1.2 in that area of denitrification, that I was looking at an alternative that we could take our existing facilities, build a percolation site on the plant, fire the plant up, run our half MGD, and then go ahead and line some of the ponds, because we're not going to, if we're running a half MGD into the percolation ponds, we're not going to need all the ponds that we have right now. So we can keep the ponds that we will need for the excess influent, which is about, at that point, would be about 600,000, 0.6 MGD. So by doing that and percolating half the amount, which shouldn't affect the mounding and things like this, like the 1.1 is or could, then we could go ahead and get the benefit right away of using the existing facilities to percolate the half MGD, and the community gets a benefit. And then before we go and spend a bunch of money on construction, we can look for a suitable percolation site that can take all of our flow, and not only all of our flow, but future flow. And that's what I was proposing to at least be thinking about, because we're waiting for the numbers to come in on the percolation of the facility. I mean, I'm hoping that everything works as planned out there and we can get the benefit of that extra water for the community. But I think that we need to have something in our back pocket to look at, and I'm thinking that to the real cost of lining the ponds, because I'm trying to keep things in two separate things. We're trying to get a water benefit, but we have a nitrate issue that we're dealing with the regional board on. That's the nitrate issue is the big elephant in the room. So if we can line some of the ponds that we're going to be using, if we have to go to that option, then the real cost of that's going to probably be, I would say, with the cost of the liners, and we could probably get away for, you know, 6 or 7 million with construction costs and everything else. That's what I'm thinking, or 5 million. And then you go ahead and you got our existing facility, we can go ahead and percolate and get the benefit of water. But then if it takes us a while to find a suitable percolation site somewhere else that we can percolate our water, then we bought ourselves the time to do it. But at least this way we can continue with the process that we have now, and then we can utilize the plant that we've already got, you know, online. So I'm not saying that, you know, I'm just trying to get something in play here, and really like for you guys to sit down with staff and then the engineering committee so we can kind of hash these things out, get some real numbers on what the, you know, the lining is going to cost, because we have to have something in place, because even if the percolation goes, construction isn't going to start for a year or two and then, you know, be completed for a year or two, and we're going to getting closer and closer to that ramp down period. So I kind of like to have something in our back pocket that we could fall back on if the percolation studies that you guys are conducting right now do not come back with the numbers that you're hoping they come back with.
The infiltration test is very important, because if we can get a 1/4 foot per day or more, then the 3 proposed 7.5 acre ponds, 2 would be wet, 1 would be dry. So at 1.2 MGD, that's 3.8 acre feet per day. It takes 2 ponds, it takes 15 acres to percolate at that rate. And so you'd have 2 out of 3. If the infiltration rate's less than 0.25, then you end up with all 3 ponds wet, and you need you look for another pond. But if the percolation rate's significantly higher, then having excess pond area is just fine. It's good practice. So it's important to know whether we're at a quarter foot per day
Right.
or
And
not. So we're about to
find out.
clean out the one basin, construct a second smaller basin to get more data. The best data is actual demo-sized tests that you're doing. You can do small little tests, but they're just not as valuable as the tests that we're about to restart in the next couple of weeks. So watching that, when it's ready and up and running in a few weeks, for the following few weeks will be really important. Because if not, we'll be scrambling to look at these alternatives. It's just that your numbers for a full half an MGD are correct. It's 500 or 600 acre feet. But the concern I have with the regional board on the septage being dumped into pond 11 is completely unacceptable to them.
Right.
And it's going to change. And then, so if we fix the septage and run it into headworks, we have this added strength. And with the added strength, we're downrating the plant from 0.5 to 0.32. Same plant, but we're only putting 0.32. So then instead of putting 0.6, 0.7 over to the ponds, we're putting 0.8, 0.9 over to the ponds. And at 9 feet per year of evaporation, with that flow rate, you need 115 acres. You need all the north ponds. And 115 acres of ponds is a lot of lining. So it's not just a few lined ponds, it's lined everything on the north, which are all mucked up right now. And have massive, you saw the size of the riprap on those walls. To get the liner up the side of the walls, you gotta remove all that. It's a pretty big effort.
And I understand that there's a lot of undertaking here, but I would really like to enter into dialogue to where we can be looking at exploring all of our options. And that way we're not getting down the road and all of a sudden, okay guys, we gotta make a U-turn and go back and relook at this thing. I'd like to have something in place, ready to launch if plan A somehow doesn't work.
You have this 20 acres to the left of pond 17. It's actually 27 acres, but we're going to use the north portion of it for contractor staging area, which leaves 20 acres of open dirt space. We did the biology and cultural on this with the sequel people to use it as potential backup ponds if you need more pond space. Most cost effective is to take the 200,000 cubic yards out of the bottom of this pond 17 and 15, put it right up on the bank, which is the 20 acres. But if you take that much soil, you spread it 8 feet high, it takes 10 acres. You spread it 10 feet high, it takes 8 acres. So really, with the 20 plus acres, if you needed to, and you only got a perk rate of 0.2, you could build a 4th pond, cozy up right adjacent to and in line with the 3 that we're proposing, have a 4th that's already in the secret document, and just stockpile north of it to 10 feet high instead of 6 or 8 feet high over the whole area. So that's my backup plan first. If that backup plan to the backup plan falls, then we would have to get more creative.
And that's all I was trying to do, because it's just the early results from the percolation, and I just like to not have all of our eggs in one basket.
I think the board has a pretty good overview of this, and I think doing this discussion with the staff and then the engineering committee is probably where we need to go with this rather than here. But I would hate to spend money lining ponds as a safety valve and then not need it. That'd be a lot of money, but I think this is something that the staff can get together with you guys and engineering committee and bring back to the board a recommendation from the staff and from the engineering committee on how to move forward, because I think got a pretty good picture of the various options.
So this is for information only and not budgeted or approvals of budgets, but it's our plan to continue to work on alternative 3B and proceed to 90% over the next 4 weeks so that we keep the project rolling, because we're planning to go out to bid. Then the 100% will be available by the end of May, be out to bid and open bids by the end of June, start construction in July.
And we need to move forward.
Yeah.
And
I don't want to stop moving forward. I just want to, sit down so that we can just get things discussed.
anytime but the last week, we'll all be out of country on vacation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. Okay, at that, we will go to new business 2, authorize staff to hire a fleet maintenance consultant for Secretary John Howard, Assistant General Manager.
Yeah, so it's brought up in our engineering committee that we may have some deficiencies in our fleet maintenance program, and I thought it'd be a good idea to talk to the board and see if there's consensus that we could hire a consultant to help us out with doing some of our reporting and get us up to stuff on like the CHP reporting, stuff like that. We do our fleet maintenance as far as checking our oils and stuff, but having all the documentation that we may need. I know you guys have worked for larger agencies and they do have fleet maintenance programs. And I think the board's direction, if we were to come to you for a new vehicle or something, you're gonna wanna see maintenance records on that vehicle if we wanna replace it. So, if we could get somebody to give us a hand getting that all set up.
That's a good idea. I think one of the things that we need to look at now is that with everything across the board, people want to know why they're spending money on or whatever. And I think one of the best pieces of paper we can have is say, this is what we have, this is what's done here. And then the other part of it too is that it reassures you and your staff that the things you folks have. I mean, the more we talk about, you just talking about restrictions and this, we see everything has a check down, a check on. I can't expect you or if you're doing that, who's checking the lines, if you're doing this, who's testing lines. You gotta have someone that does it on a daily basis, because the days of us trying to do 50 things may not be the healthiest thing for us to do. Get a subject expert in there that does it on a regular basis. Takes them one day to do it, it may take you, your staff, bits and pieces, a week to do it. And so I think the problem with that is that we all know from the CHP, if they want a number, it's not there, then that shuts down operations, that piece of equipment. How long does it take you to get that back up, back up the thing? So I think that that's a good thing to look at, to have someone do that exactly. We just focus on that part there because it's going to also increase the efficiency because you get a better picture of where your equipment's at. So I support that idea.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I think fine, go out and, put together what you're looking for and see who's out there that's willing to do that for us and bring.
All right, do I have a motion?
I have a motion.
Second.
I make a motion that we, what do you call it, John? What do you call the position there, John?
Consultant.
Yeah, I make a motion that we give the GM there, John Halton, direction to go out there and look for fleet maintenance consultant. What type of timeline are we talking? 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
I can bring it back to the next board.
Okay, then you can have it ready by the next board, so we can start looking at new doing on the next board.
Okay. I have a motion by Director Webb, second by Director Glennon. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Okay, Director's reports, comments, future agenda items.
I went to the AVIC meeting last night. It's probably the quickest meeting I've ever been to for them. They talked about THM levels, and they didn't, for their water, they didn't put up Kern County's levels, but they I talked to Director Diaz and he got them for me, but apparently we're in a lot better shape, or they're in Kern County in a lot better shape than LA County, so that was a positive.
Any other director reports, comments? I would just like to take this opportunity to welcome our newest member to the board, Greg Washington. He comes with a very impressive resume and portfolio, and I feel that he's going to be a great asset to the board going forward. Welcome.
What about his first name though?
Dennis.
So we got Big Greg and Little Greg.
Gregory.
Oh, Gregory and Greg.
Yeah. But I'd like to say it's an honor to sit on this board and serve our community. I understand I have some very large shoes under here to fit for Mr. Williford, but very excited about it and looking forward to the challenge.
Welcome. Any other director comments? Okay, director request, DR1. DR1, I asked this to be brought to the board. Many years ago, the districts created the Rosamond Community Services District Foundation as a 501c3 to bring funding for park and recreation activities for the community. And being as we do not have any funding for any type of community recreation or community activities or this nature, and the foundation was sent away from this agency. I do not know why, but it was. But I would like to bring it back home and bring it back under the umbrella of the RCSD, and because, you know, we just had 2 funerals in this community, one for Daniel Lansgard, who was a huge advocate and proponent for parks, and we replaced Director Williford, whose parks was very close to his heart. I know the districts gave up the Parks and Recreation mantle, but you know, we still have the Parks and Recreation Committee, which is I'm serving on, and with another director, I can't remember who it was. Mr. Webb and I, we're both volunteering our time because there's no funding for it, so we volunteer our time. And you know, I said before, I'm not ready to close the door on parks for our community. I mean, I know there's things that we have to do differently, but I believe by bringing the foundation back, we'll at least have an opportunity to bring money in and get the money here first before we actually spend it. And so that's why I would like to bring the foundation back to the RCSD.
Can I give you a comment on that?
Yes.
I don't know exactly what the bylaws said there, but I would ask Greg if we entertain that, then let's look to maybe perhaps expand what the foundation can do. Because I think, you know, people had voted a while back about not wanting parks, and I'm all on board for that. However, that's today. One thing we don't do here, we don't look far out. We look a week at a time, a month at a time. So maybe let's look at the bylaws and see if we can add some additional, what it can do. And it may not be directly for the parks, but you know, one thing I keep looking at, the dynamics at the school and other things, maybe there's other ways the foundation can support and help.
Yes.
A lot of times the name only for something does a lot. And I remember at one of the meetings, one of the citizens got really upset about no parks. Well, I can see no parks, my kids have grown no parks, but do we see all the little people running around the neighborhood here? Just a moment now, it's a comment. So I can appreciate that, but I will tell everyone this here, if you have bad schools and no parks, you have really weak communities. So The foundation, I would ask that we look at it for something different, because we keep coming back to the word parks only. There's other ways a foundation can help a community grow and thrive. I had spoke with John about looking over on Diamond Street about the building there. Perhaps we could use foundation at some point to help that make it more. But let's look at it. But if you will entertain looking at the bylaws and changing,
We can definitely look at the bylaws.
that's something that I could look into being support there. Then if no, any other folks there?
She had her hand up before me, so I'll be after you, ma'am.
I just, he mentioned it, but the community, when we had that vote, 77% of the people in Rosamond voted no. So 77 from 100, that's only 23% of the people that's left. Was the foundation a success the last time?
You're asking me the question?
I'm just,
Okay, so
I'm
that's
just
why-
asking,
just
I
a
don't
moment.
know.
When you look at the success, I don't know, I know some of the things the foundation were a part of. I believe they have the cancer walk up there at the high school. Foundation was a part of, there have been other things. One of the things that, the problem here, if you look around the boardroom, we have 12 people here. People don't want to get involved, and why I don't know. But you're right, 77% said, no, I'm not challenging that. That's not the issue. The comment I made, asked Greg, maybe we could expand what the foundation looks at doing. There are other things you can help a community with. I just made a passing comment about, that, for example, our youth football team. They don't really have a place to practice, the youth football team. We have other things around here. I know we have Kern County parks here, so that's not the challenge. So please do me a favor. You can make the comment, but that's not the challenge. I just asked him if we could expand what the foundation looks at to be able to do more things to benefit the community here. Not that the parks is a part of it. He said parks. We do have an advisory, an ad hoc committee. I'm just saying long term.
Wasn't it turned back over to the county though?
Yeah, the prior GM and the board turned it back over to the county.
You're correct. They did with the request by the vote of the community. So we're just asking that you take into consideration what the community want. And I understand,
The challenge is not that. All I said was communities that thrive have good school systems and parks. A lot of us in here, we're pretty mature. We don't have little people. My little person's 19 years old. But on the flip side of that, one of the things I do see around here, 40 of the kids go to play. They all cram into United Park to try to practice baseball. The high school's not letting me. I'm just saying, I'm not talking about a park issue per se. I asked him to just expand the verbiage of the bylaws so the foundation could do more for more people. That's all I said.
Okay.
I'm not on the park issue.
and I'm done, but does the bylaws actually address that?
That's why I asked him to look at them so we could see.
Can I see the bylaw? Do you have a copy that I can
Okay,
take home and study?
I do not have a copy. This one will do. Greg is part of the foundation. It's not an issue per se. I said to see what the bylaws say, to see if we can expand the bylaws to include more. That's the point I brought up.
I agree with you guys, and I agree with her saying that the voters voted 77%. I don't know if that's the exact number.
It is correct.
Okay.
They know it.
So, I agree the voters voted that we are not going to be in parks and we gave it back. I have small children. We play at United in the dirt with grass. Or with dirt with no grass. I'm not saying that we need to ramp this up and try to get our parks back or anything, but I think we need to be proactive in the idea that at some point when people are tired of their kids falling down and skinning their knees in the dirt versus on the grass, that we're not starting from zero. I'm not saying tomorrow, 5 years from now, we need to go get our parks back. I'm just saying at some point people are going to be tired of going to a park that they might not feel is being adequately maintained by somebody that doesn't have a stake in it. So I agree with Greg, and Rick had a very good point, expanding those bylaws to not just us focusing on parks, but a community effort. you know, that building needs attention. There's other things that we can do to help out our community, not just look at parks.
Who will pay for it?
Okay, Mrs. Lewis, I'll address your question right now. I want to put this out here so that way nobody gets the wrong idea. Nobody up here, and me included, is proposing on spending a dime of the public's money towards parks. The community spoke loud and clear about that. What I want to do is that there's a way to help the community out, and the 501c3, which is the Rosamond RCSD Foundation, is a avenue to help the community. And yes, we can change the bylaws to put money towards all kinds of different things, but a 501c3 is a way for corporations, if they want to donate $100,000 to the community of Rosamond, they'll donate it to a 501c3. Then we can take that money and we can go spend it on stuff for the community that's going to help the community out. And what I'm trying to do is just bring the 501c3 back to the RCSD so we have a way forward of making life better for the community. I'm not out, you don't need to worry that we're just going to go ahead and start spending money and writing checks, for the parks. That's not going to happen. If anything is going to be done for the community, the money's going to be in hand first. And that's through the 501c3. And when we've got a need in the community, somebody needs something, this or this, the kids need it, whatever, if we can write a check and say, here you go, it's done, it's paid for. The taxpayers don't pay for it, it's already paid for. And that's what I'm looking at doing, but it's just a way to keep the door open to do things for the community that's going to enhance the quality of life here. And that's all we're talking about. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I live in the West Park area, and that's not too far from the park. And I'm still paying all my property tax toward the park. How could I get that off of my property tax?
That, what you're paying on, ma'am, is a CSA that was established when your house was built and everybody bought their homes there. That is through the county, that's not through this agency. I would suggest that you would get a hold of Zach Scribner's office and ask, is there a way to eliminate that CSA if the park is not going to be maintained or taken care of by the county? You might have a reason to get them to remove that CSA. I don't know. But we have no control over that CSA.
One other question. Do we have a grant writer here?
Pardon me?
Someone that writes grants in order to,
No,
for
we
the
don't have a grant writer.
501c3?
But no, we don't at this time.
I have participated in grant writing through my current thing. I'm not saying I'm an aficionado, but I have participated in it. So I'm more than willing to donate my time to help out in any way towards the foundation.
So were you looking for a motion or just?
I'm looking for a motion in a second, because it's an action item as well.
Okay, here's a question. Before we vote on that, are we looking to have the bylaws looked at to add that to it, or are we looking at it all lump sum? How are we looking?
Jay, on bylaws for a 501c3, can we have them modified?
Well, let me tell you why I'm looking at. I don't mind bringing it up, but if we bring it up in its current form, I think a lot of people, if it just says parks only in there, I don't know how it reads, I think that's going to create an issue. I would ask perhaps if we table this part, or do we ask to have that added to it, because that's a separate group. We can't tell them here what to add to their information, but, so what's the best way to present it so we can maybe move forward with it, sir?
Thank you, President Wood. what we will need to do is to make sure, since parks are no longer a part of the RCSD, to make sure that the expenditure of money on it is appropriate. That's very quickly answered, and then we can figure out the next step, keeping in mind that the 501c3 is, of course, a separate entity. So that's something that we can very quickly confer with staff on and get back to you on that.
So we can just make a motion to consider bringing the foundation back here.
We're not ready to reinstate it.
Reinstated,
No,
but
we're not ready to
the
do that.
motion for that, and then we'll deal with the verbiage once we confer with those people there.
Right. Maybe there's no problem in taking the preliminary steps to see, to determine the feasibility of bringing it back.
Well, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. President, that we consider bringing the foundation back under the, it was taken away completely?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's just see about getting back to the involvement of bringing it back into the RCSD, and then obviously get that there. Yes, no?
Yeah, I think what the president can do is just give direction to staff.
Okay, we're not even voting on it.
No need to
Okay,
vote.
there we go, we're not going
So, can we get the bylaws to staff and they can get it to you, you guys can review them and advise on what we need to do?
Sure.
All right, real good then. Then we will go ahead and move forward as directed on DR1. And DR2, discussion and action to build a demo conservation garden.
I know it seems like every time we do something, it falls in place, but it wasn't because of the foundation issue, but that'd be a good reason to have a foundation. A lot of the companies up here, they want to do things for the community. And the only way they get to do things for the community is have an avenue to get credit for doing it for the community. So one of the things I thought about, and was that this is 50-50 here, so you can get your thinking about is considering and looking at putting perhaps a demonstration garden up there, not just a garden of plants, but you know, one of the things we don't have here, we don't have where people can just sit down for the moment and take a break. We're limited on spaces, and I know people don't like to go out of places, so this is preliminary, but if you look at up at Lancaster, around their library, they have different plant materials and different descriptions. I think that's nice. If you look at some of the other places, they actually have places where you can actually sit. And I'm not talking about nothing close to the Descansal Gardens, but if you've ever been to the Descansal Gardens, it's a world unto its own. And I was hoping, and Lizette's going to follow up in just a moment here, but we consider looking at something where we can at least go out and see the feasibility of doing this here. One of the things my community does, we fuss about everything, but maybe this is something that has no issue, that we could all come together because they could take the ideas from the garden and implement it at their homes. One of the things that we have to start thinking about is every time we get a dust storm, we're losing topsoil. You don't get that back. And I know for a while there, no water issue, let's just let everything go there and everything go dry and it blows away. But look at our community. When a community doesn't look well kept, elements decide to move in there. What I mean by that, and I had said it several years ago, it's a concept called broken windows. If it looks raggedy, it looks old, it looks unkept, you do nothing about it. The crooks think it's unkept, they don't want it, and they do things. You keep things looking vibrant and looking nice, people will take care of it. That's part of it. Another part of it too, people go to the library, you go grab a cup of coffee, you don't want to sit there, you come down here to the sitting garden, you sit there for the afternoon. So part of it is to just see if the idea is there. And the other part is to build upon it and expand upon it and see how much you can have. A lot of them, they have those, Greenfield, they have those exercise machines and they have different stations. You can do sit-ups on one, you can do leg, and they have those things there. So the question is, why can't our community have it? Don't know, maybe we never thought about it, or maybe we're so busy in our own world, we don't care what's around us. When you stop caring what's around you, you're not in touch anymore. So that's part of the part I had there. Was that initially approached me and we talked about it. We're going to be working as a team on it. You know, you go ahead and do your part of it.
So we felt that this would be a very nice thing to give back to the community. so that way we can show them what a nice conservation garden looks like, what actually grows out here. And we were also looking at offering workshops at the garden where we would have a small amphitheater. Currently we have to go to the college, and a lot of people don't travel because, you know, it's a ways, or they don't have a way to get to the college. So we would bring resources here to the community, bring people here that could educate them, and we would fund it by ways of looking for sponsors. So it may be a family that may want to name a garden after a loved one. And we would also look to the seniors within our community to give them something that they can have a buy-in, and they can volunteer their time to look after the garden and possibly even being part of the workshop process. But again, we're at still the planning stage. If we were to bring back the foundation, I think this would help offset a lot of the cost and maybe possibly encourage people to donate to it.
And another part of it is that what I would like to see is this is not just an RCSD thought process. Get involved. When we get to that point, we'll make folks aware of it and come out there, because I think once everyone knows what you're trying to do, they can all have their input into it. Seems like we say something and we're the only ones that are doing it. I think if everyone gets involved, because it's a corner lot, that's a lot of space. I remember Lorelei had several years ago said that maybe we could have a spot in the community for people that have lost their loved ones. They can have a reflection garden or whatever type thing. So it would be open to ideas, but I think the fact that we want to do something that we're all involved in, I think that's a good starting point. So when we get closer, she'll have it posted, we'll bring it up at the meeting so everyone's aware of it. And I would hope that we get excited enough so we can all be out there and at least share thoughts with someone, because everyone may have something different, but the more we talk about it, the more we find out how much we have in common. Thank you, sir. Anyone in the public? Questions? Suggestions?
I'd like to comment. I think the garden would provide innovative ways for the homeowner to maintain a nice landscape and conserve water at the same time. I know that's a practice that we've done in the past at my former employer, and it's really been beneficial to the community.
Any other discussion? Okay. Well, sounds like a great idea, and look forward to hearing more about it. Okay, with that, we will go to General Counsel update. Mr. J?
No update, thank you.
Assistant General Manager update, John Howard?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I spoke to AVAC about possibly banking some water out there at our water bank, and I spoke with the operations manager just to find out where they were at, if they had capacity in their lines yet, because last time we had spoke to them that they were running wide open and they didn't have any capacity for banking.
They said for at least a year.
Yeah, it seems to be the current status also is they're putting out about 125 acre feet a day, and didn't know if they could actually supply us water to our water bank at this time. But if we were really interested in it, I would take it up to Dennis Chisholm and see if they could make room in their capacity. But it sounds like they're putting a lot of water out there right now. And then I also talked to them about banking water with them, just as a measure to have some banked water, and they no longer bank water with utilities. They have some people that have water in their bank right now, because they used to offer the opportunity to bank water there, but they no longer offer that service.
It's all theirs.
Yeah. Well, there is other customers' water in there, but they no longer offer the opportunity to store water there. I also spoke with Jesse Dollywald on the arsenic treatment consolidation with the other entities that want to join into our district. We still have 4 people that haven't signed water system. Joe's been looking at the actual contracts and should have a decision on it, on at least the school contract this week. There was a red line version that the school sent. We forwarded it to Joe, and he's going to take a look at it and give us his opinion on whether it's okay or not. And then I spoke with this gentleman from Desert Breeze. He's close. He has a couple of issues, and I told him to go ahead and put his issues on a red line drawing of the contract of where he has the issues, and then I would send them to Joe, and maybe we could resolve them, or maybe we can't. But I definitely give him the opportunity to express his concerns. So that's about all I have for now.
Hey Greg, can I pass on a compliment to these two?
Yes.
Hey, both of you, I want to know we've had some dynamics and transition the last few weeks, but you folks have done a good job for us, and I appreciate the effort. And I know a lot came at you real quick in your labs, and the things you're bringing up now by you sincerely appreciate it. I know the board appreciates the fact that you've accepted the challenge and you're taking care of it. Thank you very much.
Discussion on that? Okay, Director of Finance, Brad?
No update at this time.
And Director of Public Works, Brock?
I attended the Antelope Valley Integrated Regional Water Management Plan meeting last week. Our project, the wastewater treatment plant, is on their final project list. So I will keep the board updated as we know more, but right now we're one of 5 that could qualify for grant funding through Prop 1.
And Director of Administration, Board Secretary update, was that?
Nothing to report.
And with that, I'd like to motion for adjournment.
Second.
Motion is made by Director Webb, second by Director Stewart. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:04, 5:0.
Thank you.